It's 9 a.m. and I would like to call to order the meeting of the Transportation Committee of October 24th, 2024. Before we begin, please note this meeting is being recorded.
What I didn't know.
Welcome to my colleagues and everyone joining us here in person, as well as those listening on the phone. If you would like to provide public comment at today's meeting, and if you have not done so already, please let Thomas in the back of the room or just in the call-in line know what items you would like to speak at today. Madam Secretary, please begin calling roll.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. Director Hernandez is absent. Moulton Peters. Here. Rabbit.
Here.
Verdoni.
Here.
Safai. Absent. Thier. Absent. Vice Chair Maston.
Here.
Chair Hill.
Here.
And President Cochran.
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum. You are a committee of the whole. Also in the room you have Directors Garbarino, Giudice, Grosboll, and Theriault.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please introduce. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Please introduce the first item.
We're going to start with item 3. It's an informational report regarding the district's advisory committees, and staff is available to answer any question from directors.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the directors regarding item 3? None. That concludes the discussion on this item. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item?
We have no speakers for this item.
Okay. Thank you. No action is required for item 3. We'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is a presentation of highlights from the 2023 survey of users and non-users of bridge, bus, and ferry. The presentation slides begin on page 37, and Ron Downing will introduce the committee.
Good morning, Chair Hill, Ron Downing, Director of Planning. Good morning, members of the committee and board members. I'm here today to introduce an item conducted by Corey Canaperi and Galina, CC&G, on behalf of the district during 2023. In 2022, the board authorized going forward with a system-wide survey of users and non-users of bridge, bus, and ferry. This was important for 2 reasons. Conditions have changed dramatically since the pandemic, and we wanted to get a sense of our riders' attitudes and perceptions of our service, how frequently they rode, what they planned on doing in the future. Another important component was the Title VI plan that your board approved in September for submittal to the FTA. Our most recent data was from MTC in 2018, and FTA requirements are that the data be 5 years or newer in that analysis. So we went through a procurement process. We were fortunate to entertain CC&G as our consultant. We have a long history with CC&G. We first engaged them in 2008 and then again in 2015 to do similar efforts. So roughly 7 years apart, we're on target again. And when we first solicited proposals back in 2008, I called a number of the references for CC&G. They've done work for all of the major transit systems in the Bay Area: BART, SFMTA, Caltran, AC Transit, MTC, Marin Transit, and of course us several times. And what I learned in 2008 is everybody thought that CC&G walked on water. And that has been borne out by their efforts for us in 2008 and 2015, and again in the 2023 effort. So with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce John Canaperi, who will walk you through the presentation of some of the high-level findings of what they learned for us in the survey effort.
Thank you, Ron, for the kind words. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I did prepare today a brief presentation of a pretty robust survey. So this is going to give you some key highlights of some of the findings, but understand that we do have some comprehensive reports behind this, and there's additional information that would be available to you. As Ron mentioned, we are a local San Francisco firm. We do an awful lot of transportation research. We've worked on similar studies for other agencies, and we've had the pleasure to work with Golden Gate Transit on a number of areas. So this is an area of expertise for us. First, I want to talk about a little bit of background on the study itself. So the bulk of the survey work was done in 2023. Some of the things that we were looking to understand from this project were changes in travel patterns post-pandemic. How riders use the bus and ferry, both understanding that currently and understanding how that may have changed since the last time a survey was done. Reasons riders choose the bus or ferry. Obviously, or clearly one of the objectives is to look to add ridership to your transit services. So understanding why current riders use it is a key component that we found in doing transportation research to help understand that. We also wanted to find out who the riders are. So demographics of riders, understanding who your riders are now, given that the last time a major survey was done was several years ago. This is certainly necessary for Title VI, but this is also necessary just to understand as an agency who's riding your services now on the ferry and the bus. We also did a robust survey among non-transit users. These are drivers. These are folks who live in areas that are served by Golden Gate and make that trip across the bridge, and we want to understand their likelihood of considering transit. We also look to understand the barriers to drivers, why they weren't using it now or wouldn't consider using it. And finally, we did a targeted survey among Canal District residents to understand their transit use and needs specifically. Okay. Why was this study done? Well, what I will say is there is quite a bit of data that you should be able to use now and into many years into the future, we hope, because of the multitude of data that we collected for these reasons. Some of the reasons would be to guide service priorities. Others would be marketing, obviously, to be able to understand who your users are and how to market to them. Outreach, so when you're reaching out to potential riders, understanding some of the messages that may resonate with those folks is going to be useful, and that is information that's included in our reporting. Title VI is a necessary component, and that was achieved through this effort, as well as planning purposes for both bus and ferry. There were several study components. This slide shows a list of the key ones. The first one there is an onboard survey of Golden Gate bus and ferry riders. This is going to be the bulk of my presentation as far as findings. This was a system-wide effort on each system. This was a robust effort, statistically reliable, and I think a lot of the data there is really critical to understanding who your users are. In addition to the onboard survey, we did a non-rider survey among drivers and infrequent transit users, and those were folks who made the trip across the bridge again and who went to areas where bus or ferry serves. Sort of as a extension of that non-rider survey, we did a more in-depth qualitative survey. And that gave us the opportunity to ask more in-depth questions among people who did not use transit to help give us more than just that check-the-box type of answer, to give us more verbatim responses, understand that a little bit better. And finally, the targeted survey among Canal District residents, which we'll talk about in this presentation as well. So first, the onboard surveys. So the first slide here shows some key takeaways from those onboard surveys. The first bullet point, one of the things that we found out is you have an awful lot of new riders. So you're more than half of your current riders on both ferry and bus have been using Golden Gate Transit or Golden Gate Ferry for the past 3 years, or have started using it within the past 3 years. So some new eyes on the system, opportunity to sort of make new impressions. But it really is important to understand that it's not just folks who have been riding this service or utilizing it for the last 10 years. You have a lot of new riders, and that's something that we found out from these two surveys. Additionally, the weekly usage. So weekly usage that we found through this survey, Golden Gate Transit riders use the service about 3 days a week. Golden Gate Ferry riders use the service 1 day a week. Okay? So this has changed, and this is not a surprise to you, and it's changed since 2018, and it's people are using the services less. Okay? And so that is also something that understand that we provide detail on in the reporting. Additionally, this last bullet point is particularly encouraging in my opinion. So future patronage. So we asked the question, do you think that you'll be using the ferry bus more or less in the next 6 months, or about the same? Had a very high share of your riders who are saying that they're either going to use it more or they're going to ride it about the same, about 9 and 10. That's a very, very encouraging percentage, in my opinion. In addition to that, you have 35% of transit riders and 43% of ferry riders who say they're going to use it more. Okay. And so this is one where I think, in terms of looking forward and sort of seeing, sometimes what we'll see on this question is, for other systems is you have a pretty good chunk of folks who say, I'm not going to be using it. I'm going to change my patterns. I'm going to be moving. I'm going to be doing something else. But in this case, we're seeing sort of the opposite. So I think this is a very encouraging one. This slide sort of illustrates that first bullet point on the previous, which is new riders. So among ferry users, 56% have been utilizing the service for 3 years or less. So that's a nice number. And 58% of Golden Gate Transit users. So pretty good chunk, well over half. In addition to that, you have 37%, as I mentioned, of ferry users who say that they'll be using it more, and 26%, excuse me, let me back up on that. 56 and 58% who have been using it for 2 years or less. In addition to that, a good chunk of these are actually very new riders, 6 months or less. Okay, so among that 56% of the ferry riders, 37% have been using it 6 months or less. And among that 58% of the Golden Gate Transit users, 26% have been using it for 6 months or less. So in addition to relatively new riders, you have some that really brand new eyes on the system. This is the weekly usage illustrating those usage numbers I mentioned in the previous slide. Golden Gate Ferry about 1 day a week on average, and Golden Gate Transit riders about 3 days a week. Not surprisingly, there are some differences when you look at the data in more detail. For example, Larkspur and Tiburon ferry users utilize it more than 1 day a week. But even among Larkspur users, it's only about 1.5. Okay, so it's more than the average, but it's not 5 days a week, right? Tiburon, about 2 days a week, so even more. But again, it's not using it every day. And this is a slide illustrating the patronage, the usage in the future. So if you look at this, the question was, do you plan to use Golden Gate Transit Ferry, Golden Gate Transit or Golden Gate Ferry more or less in the next year or so? And so the percentage on top where you have more, 37% of Golden Gate Ferry users say more, and 35% of Golden Gate Transit. And when you add that to the about the same, you're at your 90% for both systems. This is really important to point out because we are going to be talking a little bit about the people who don't use your service, the drivers, and we want to bring them on, right? You want to bring them and you want to kind of say, okay, try us, right? But I think what we always try to do when we do studies like this is say, let's look at who's using it now and seeing if there's low-hanging fruit there, right? Is there the ability now, people who are already familiar with the service, to get them to use it even more? And there seems to be a willingness to do that. And so I think it's an important statistic to understand. One other note on this one. We did ask why. Among those people who said, yeah, I would use it more, I use it, at least about the same. And 2 key reasons came up, and I don't think the first one's going to surprise you. Return to work. Return to work and the necessity of needing to utilize it more was one of the reasons that both ferry and transit users said that they would be using it more in the future. And the other one I think is important to know as well, which was it's a comfortable or enjoyable ride. They like the ride. People who utilize the service are saying this is one of the reasons why I'm going to use it more. We also asked for perceptions, or let's call it key reasons that your current users use the ferry, use the bus right now. Okay, this was a list of responses, and they could check off their top reasons. Okay, and so what you're seeing there are the responses that came up the most for each of the different services. So for ferry, the ones that came up most were it's relaxing, it avoids traffic, it's better for the environment, and it's faster. Those are the top 4. So for bus, the big one right there is the top one, right? It's I don't have a car, I don't drive. Okay, so that comes up at the top of the list for bus. It doesn't come up, even in the top, in the top at all for ferry. So very different, right? In addition to that, the other of the top 4 on bus were relaxing, less expensive, and better for the environment. Right? This next slide is that same question, but just breaks it out in a little bit more detail and shows those percentages. So on the left-hand side, you see ferry. And so the key reasons to use for ferry listed there with the percentages. On the right-hand side in the green, that's bus. Okay? And so you can see for ferry, relaxing reduces stress. Well, a huge share are saying that, 68%. Avoids traffic, 59%. And then the other percentages, in addition to that. A couple of things to point out on ferry for this particular question. So there were some differences by ferry route when you look at this question, right? And so when you look at Larkspur or Tiburon riders, they're much more likely to say productive use of time on this question. So overall, productive use of time was 28%. It looks like there. Among Larkspur riders, it was 37%. Among Tiburon riders, it was 45%. And so there are differences, and those are some things that we call out on our report because it's in the detailed report so that you understand that, yes, this is what it is overall, but it's also important to know that you have some segments and subsets of your ridership.
Quick question, Sausalito not mentioned. Are they just so different with tourist riders?
They're there, and we break those out without a doubt. So I called out just those 2 because those were the ones that were different, but they are definitely included in the ferry, as well as special events. We did special event surveying as well. So those are all included when you're looking at the overall.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then looking at the right side on bus, so again, don't have a car or don't drive, that's 47%. That's the top one, almost half. Okay. After that, it's relaxing, reduces stress. Less expensive comes up, right? It doesn't come up so much on ferry. So those are the top 3 there. A couple of call outs for bus on this question. Those using the regional bus routes are even more likely to say that they don't have a car or don't drive. So there we have overall 47%. Among the regional routes, it's 56%. Okay, it's well above half who say that's my main reason for using bus transit, again, bus transit. Another call out here is those on the commuter routes are more likely to say productive use of time on this question, as well as parking is easier or less expensive. That doesn't surprise me, but it is something that's important to understand as well.
Yeah. Did you do any questions on timing of the ferries?
In terms of
At what time of
time preferences? We did not. And so this questionnaire was pretty full in terms of, collecting demographics, asking satisfaction and usage. So it was not to the level where we asked what would be your preferences for time.
If I may, to answer, I think what Director Thier is interested in is our marketing team is doing a survey of folks to see what the preferences might be for time.
Yeah,
separate.
I actually have requested that we do a survey specific for Tiburon, and you and I had that conversation a couple weeks ago, and I would very much like to be part of the planning for that survey. As our residents, that is our chief issue in Tiburon, is what time does the ferry go? Does it work for which residents? And I really want to make sure that Tiburon gets a voice, and our residents get to look at the times, and we figure out what works best for all the residents.
The key is, because we've done this before, but we are getting ready to do it again. Dana Failer, our marketing and communications director, has been tasked with surveying the Tiburon ridership only, not the other routes. Is that we have a conflict between the riders that use the service, just to give you all a heads up from prior surveys. We have those that their time is tied to what time they want to arrive at work in San Francisco. And a lot of those customers are not aligned with folks that are more aligned with what time they drop their kids off at school and then get to the boat. And we have only one boat available for Tiburon. It's not that large or robust a ridership. We provide a tremendous amount of transit service there. But there's basically one route that some people wanted, a half hour later, and some people wanted a half hour earlier. That having been said, things have changed. So our marketing communication staff will be surveying the ridership of Tiburon Ferry to see what their interests are with respect to times of the service.
Yeah, and also one thing to note is that the timing of the schools have also changed. So that might help us with the future survey.
Okay. In addition, we're still talking about,
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just looking at that last slide and wondering, what was it? Have we done this previously? Do we know the trend? It seems to me that the bus is really the not having a car. We probably have more of a transit-dependent ridership than we did pre-pandemic, safe to say. But it seems like on the ferry, I would imagine those same categories would be there and probably the same order pre-pandemic.
It wasn't, we didn't ask it in the same way, at least the last time we did it, but we do have similar questions to that on the 2018. So in terms of the choice riders, certainly something I'd go back and look at 2018 for ferry. Is that what you're?
Yeah,
I would assume too that
we have prior data from other surveys that we can correlate, but historically, our regional bus service has been a much different demographic. Historically, the average annual income was quite low for regional bus riders, and there were a larger percentage of people of color on our buses for regional ridership, while our commute bus service was closer to our ferry ridership demographic, which was generally affluent, generally much higher income, and generally less diverse. And so we have two different customers that we serve primarily on our bus service. It has shifted some now. So it's not as stark a change today, but historically, that's what we had, is we had a marked difference. You know, people riding the old Route 4 from Mill Valley have a completely different demographic than people that are riding a Route 101, getting on and off freeway bus paths at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, since we're asking questions, on this page, on the bus side, it has don't have a car, don't drive 47%, and below that, less expensive is 34%. Could we assume that those are mutually exclusive numbers?
No, they could check both of those. And so in terms of the way that this was designed, is this was a list. And so people could select, okay, what are the top reasons that I use it, right?
Well,
so you're asking just in terms of the intent of,
if they're not driving, what are they comparing the less expensive to?
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could certainly cross out it and see.
Yeah.
You know, I think logically it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because they're all of a sudden, 80% of the riders. Those good questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can we hold the questions until the end of the presentation? Thank you.
I'm okay either way.
No, I enjoy the excitement of this.
Exciting.
I can hold back my excitement. This is a nice slide. Overall satisfaction, and again, we do a lot of onboard surveys, is very strong. And 97% rate the service, ferry service 5, excellent or poor good. I mean, that's very, very strong. Okay. No matter how you slice it. 86% rate your bus service a 5 or a 4 on that 5-point scale. So this is just something I think it sort of stands for itself in terms of saying these are very, very solid numbers. I want to break them out a little bit in terms of sort of looking at, first ferry. And so this is the overall satisfaction rating. These are the percentage of riders who rate it as a 4 or 5, and this breaks it out by the different routes. So overall, you've got the 97%, and then you have the different routes listed. I think the call out here really is you're not seeing a big dip. Yeah, excuse me. 94% on Angel Island, and then it goes up, right? And so you're not seeing a big dip. You're seeing pretty nice or very nice percentages across the board here. I think the other thing I want to point out on this slide is we asked also a follow-up question, overall satisfaction. We said, well, why? You know, what are the key reasons that you give these high satisfaction ratings to ferry? Two of the key reasons that came up, helpful and professional staff, on-time departures. So those were the two. There were others, but those were the two that came up the most in terms of the key reasons why these high satisfaction ratings.
And the quality of the board.
Let me check. That's in there somewhere. And now bus. Okay. So again, 86% gave it a 4 or 5 overall. And then when you look at your commute routes, it's 85%. And when you look at regional routes, 86%. Again, I'm really showing this to see you're not seeing a big difference there. You're seeing nicely those percentages to be high percentage in both types of routes when you group them. Couple of call outs on this one. So, one of them is when you look at the excellent ratings, just the 5 ratings, there were 2 particular routes that got the highest percentages there. One was the 101 and the 580s. So those got the highest percentage of excellent ratings. Now, it doesn't mean the other routes got, poor ratings. To get 86%, you need to be doing well across the board. But those 2, in particular, were sort of the cream of the crop in terms of how they were rated by the riders. And the other thing is, as I said, on ferry, we also asked a follow up to this in terms of why are you rating the service that highly, for the positive ratings. And here again, driver helpfulness or professionalism came up as one of the top reasons, and bus cleanliness actually came up as one of the reasons they gave it a high rating. Okay. Still on the onboard rider surveys, we asked a question specifically trying to draw out, well, what could have improved your trip today? What are some of the key things that could have improved? This was also a list of responses where people could select them. Looking on the left side, it shows the key ones for ferries. So really for both more frequent service, when you have, this list, people say more frequent service, they would like to see that on both sides. On ferry, expanded hours was next. Faster travel time was next. On the bus side of things, also expanded hours came up next. And then after that, it was bus stops closer to my starting point and destination, and so on. So these are the top reasons, the top ones that were selected for this particular question. Now I want to move and talk about the study that we did among drivers or infrequent transit users. Okay, so we're moving on now from the onboard study to the other study. And this is, I guess there's 2 ways of looking at this slide. I look at this slide, which is an answer to the question, even among those who always drive, it's how likely would you be to consider bus or ferry for this trip? And this is only drivers. This is people who don't use transit and they make that trip, right? And I look at this slide and I see, wow, that's really encouraging. Because what I see 27% who say very likely, somewhat likely, try transit, to use it for that trip. And then you have 73% who say, no, not too likely, not at all likely. I think some people might look at this and say, man, I really wish it was even higher than that. But to me, and having done a number of transit surveys, to me, this is encouraging because you can't have the expectation that everybody is going to be willing to try transit. You want to see that you have a chance at getting some of these folks who are in the target market to give it a shot. And I see 27% in it. To me, it's a pretty encouraging slide. Yeah.
If I may, sorry, we're supposed to wait. I'll wait. Thanks. I'll write it down.
Here again, this is among folks who drive, who are, drivers or very infrequent transit users. We asked about barriers. And so among this, specifically among drivers, the most commonly cited barriers to trying Golden Gate Transit or Golden Gate Bus were the trip takes too long, the stops or stations not close enough, too many transfers. It's too constraining. I can't go to where I need to go. It's more convenient, more comfortable to drive, or it's too expensive. And so this is sort of having an understanding of where people are coming at who don't have or haven't utilized, transit is important. You have to understand that these are what the perceptions are. And some of these, are sort of in contradiction to people who currently drive. But you have to understand that this is sort of the key barriers that are coming up when we ask drivers some of those. Sorry. The next slide, again, this is among folks who don't use bus or transit or don't use it often. And this is question that was asked was how familiar are you with each of the following? Okay, so this understanding awareness of some of the things that that the Bridge District oversees. Okay, so the first one is location of ferry terminals in your area, high percentage of people know where those are, about 80%. So there's only a few of them, and there's a pretty high awareness in terms of people being familiar. Clipper, Clipper program, what it is, 77%. So still high percentage there in terms of people being aware of it. If not, some that aren't, but there's not a lot of confusion in terms of what a Clipper is. It starts to drop from there. So location of Golden Gate Transit bus stops in your area. So less than 2/3 are aware of that among people who don't use transit or don't use it often, but still 63%. Okay. And then from there, we asked the Golden Gate Bridge, Highway, and Transportation District Agency, right? So how familiar are you with that agency? Okay. So 49%. So why is that important? Well, it may be important when you're outreaching or communicating with folks who are not bus or transit users, understanding that, half of them don't really know what you are or who what you do or who you are. Now, people know the bridge. People have seen the ferries. They see the Golden Gate Transit buses, but they maybe don't understand what the district does. And so that's something that's useful to understand. And then finally, a discount fare program for low-income riders. Pretty low awareness or familiarity with that. About 27% said that they're very or somewhat familiar with that program. Next, couple of slides are specific to the targeted survey we did among Canal District residents. And so this particular study was a robust effort. We did over 220 surveys among Canal District residents. 95% plus were in Spanish, and we were asking questions about understanding of transit in that area and usage. And so the first slide here is an answer, the percentages, and answers to the question, how do you usually get to places outside the canal neighborhood? So a very large share used Marin Transit. 73% said Marin Transit bus is the way that I get to places outside of the area. Car, pretty high share there, 38%. And then Golden Gate Transit bus by, a little bit more than 1/3, in terms of how they get to places. Additionally, we asked, specific to areas that Golden Gate Transit serves. So we asked the question, have you traveled to any of these specific destinations in the past 2 months? So a pretty long period of time. And so among the areas that you serve, you had about 42% who traveled to San Francisco in the past 2 months. So less than, but 42%, certainly the biggest area of the ones that we asked about. And from there, it really drops. We had about 16% who said that they'd gone to Richmond or El Cerrito in the last 2 months, and only about 7% who had traveled to Sonoma County. So this kind of gives you an idea of where, areas that are traveled to from Canal District residents. And then in addition to that, we asked specifically about Golden Gate Transit. When we asked the residents why they don't use Golden Gate Transit more often, the biggest reason given by far, 2/3 indicated they just don't travel outside of Marin County very much. So it wasn't, there's other reasons, and the whole list is in the report, but it wasn't that, this is a barrier, that's a barrier. This was the biggest barrier versus some other things that might have come up. The most common reason that was given. And so that, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, these are high level. I tried to give you sort of a real snapshot of these efforts. There are additional detail that are included in the report. I don't think there's any questions, so I can probably just leave, right? I'm totally open to any questions that you may have, and can stay as long as needed.
Hey, thank you very much. First on the list, Mr. Grosval.
That statistic early on about so many new users in the last 3 years is positive, but I'm just wondering, with our lower ridership, does that mean we lost quite a few people? I
guess that's one way to look at it. I mean, your ridership changed. I mean, we can see that. Now, we're not doing the survey with the same people who did the survey in 2018, but we can just see from the demographics that there's been some changes from that in usage. What I would say is, with any transit agency, you're going to have that, that share of new riders, right? It's always happening, but I noted it because it's a much larger share than what we might see on from other transit agency onboard surveys.
I would offer we've lost a significant percentage of our commute riders. We used to offer, 25 Route 4s out of Mill Valley every morning. Today we offer 6 Route 114s, and that's more than enough. And so people aren't commuting into San Francisco. I think it's real positive, though, that, the world's turned upside down. The world's a different place. And, over half of our riders on bus and ferry have been riding for 3 years or less. They started after the pandemic came into fruition. And a rather large number in the last 6 months rode Golden Gate for the first time. So I think, the trend out there is positive. The reality, though, is for the commute market, it's all tied to downtown San Francisco, and we have no control over that. But the good news is that we are finding new riders, we are attracting them, and more importantly, we've gathered data to understand who's riding and who's not, so we can focus efforts to continue to add new riders.
Thank you. And just one follow-up on a little bit different issue. It did seem positive on the ferries that 22% indicated they took it because it's less expensive. There's a perception by many people that the ferries are fairly expensive. But I guess when you add driving over the bridge, the toll, and the parking, they considered it less expensive. Did you get many complaints about it being too expensive?
No, and in fact, I think from the ridership perspective, it's exactly what you say. And when we did, when we looked at some of the reasons for that, it was the fact that when you do add up parking, when you do add up some of these other things, it's actually, when you really do that side to side. Interestingly, when you look at drivers or non-riders, sometimes that doesn't confuse. Sometimes they think, oh, it is expensive, whereas the riders are saying, well, actually, no, it's a pretty good deal here, right? But folks maybe who haven't experienced it or haven't sort of thought it through, are not necessarily saying the same thing. So two different sides here.
Thank you.
Director Trejo.
I think Secretary Everino.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Other than what seems to be the way you surveyed the canal residents, which is perhaps in a whole, you were able to capture a significant number of people that either rode or didn't ride the transit. But I'm just wondering, on page 50 of our packet, so it's willingness to consider transit,
Okay.
In your crystal ball, what is the percentage of the overall universe of travelers? So 27% were very likely to use transit in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows who the 73% of the GoBoss who use transit in the future. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what percentage are they of the overall people traveling, this 27%?
So what this slide really shows are people who essentially qualified for the survey because they said they've made a trip from one of the key counties, from Sonoma, Marin, or from San Francisco to an area that you served, right? And this is only drivers. So in terms of what that represents, it does represent that number. I don't know the projection of how many drivers are coming across the bridge, so I don't have that, in terms of crystal ball, but in terms of who it represents kind of your overall target, right?
Driver population. Okay.
Right? Now, in addition, on this study, we also talked to some folks who were infrequent transit riders, but I chose not to show that in the slide because I think this one is more useful.
Right.
Right?
So we would assume then that you obviously have done a comprehensive job in looking at the overall universe of who are these travelers. So I guess what I'm looking for is how many are drivers outside of the people that are using R2 services right now, is your guess?
That I think you need to sort of look at some of the Bridge District, numbers. I don't have that, certainly something we could look at as a follow-up. But I don't know the number on that. I know the percentage that could be applied. Obviously, that's what we're looking at right here, but I don't know what that,
Yesterday, you had 98,376 cars cross the bridge in both directions.
It's a lot of cars.
That is.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's the first thing I look at every morning.
Yeah.
After your prayers. I'm just trying to figure out what is our goal, right?
Our goal is to grow transit ridership. Before the pandemic, for context, during the morning commute, 23% of all trips from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. from Marin and Sonoma to San Francisco were on our buses and ferries. We don't have congestion on our bridge in the morning commute. You see the Bay Bridge back up on the news. You see the Richmond Santa Fe back up on the news. have you ever seen the Golden Gate Bridge back up on the news?
And
And the reason why is because of our market penetration for transit. Now we have fewer overall trips. That 98,000 number is too low for our finances. I wish it was higher. But so the overall travel's down, but travel's down during the commute period significantly. Bridge traffic during the commute period southbound, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. is down about 28% today compared to pre-pandemic. So the transit market share is less than it was before. Because remember I said we had 25 Route 4s and now we have 6 Route 114s. So, we're not there yet. Ferry's doing much better in the commute than buses right now. But your staff looks at everything.
I do know.
Dennis, were we at 120 then before average? Or?
No, Joe knows the trends better. In our dreams, we're at 120,000 cars.
Before we wake up and look at that.
Yeah, but that wasn't the pre-pandemic number, was it?
No, we bounced around, Joe, between 110 and 115,000 probably.
Close to 100. Yeah, close to 110.
Yeah. I mean, the busiest day for bridge traffic of the year is always Mother's Day, which is so reassuring.
Director Terrio?
So in general, thank you very much for this report. In general, it's very encouraging, useful. I have a couple of curiosities that it does not address and that I'm assuming now, not provided to you in the scope of what you were to ask about. One is, for background, I'll say that back when I was still driving kids to recreational opportunities in Marin County, the haul out of the city on a nice weekend on a Saturday or Sunday morning could be pretty clogged, and the haul back into the city could be pretty clogged. Whether you're going up north for lying on a beach or hiking or eating oysters along Smolley's Bay. And so there is nothing in here that imagines the possibilities for increased recreational usage in the opposite direction from commute usage in our corridor. And that's a curiosity I have that someday, apparently not this day, I'd like to see addressed. The other curiosity that probably is not in the scope of any report that the Bridge District have done because it doesn't align directly with our corridor would be maybe for the MTC to do, and that's linkages between 101 and 80 and the possibilities for service in that and the market for that. I'll put those out there as markers for the future.
Bolton Peters.
Yeah. Thank you. Follow-up question on your new riders. Do you in your report have demographic correlations with the new riders, age-wise and everything?
We sure do.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's an important piece to be able to look at.
Yeah. Curious what accounts for the high quality remarks from 580 and 101 riders. I'm guessing it's that we're on time and other service may not be.
I looked at it and saw that those were hitting those are the top two as far as excellent. Yeah. I'll have to go back and see. I don't know that their reasons differ that much from the overall, but I have to go back to be able to see specifics.
Just a curiosity. And then just finally, since you do pull in for other transit providers, is there anything that stood out either as unique or just stood out about our service or the data that you acquired?
One of the call-outs, again, that I mentioned before was the new riders, which I think is worthwhile to mention. I think that the thing that after the satisfaction question, which was coming up a lot, it's not that we don't see this with other transit agencies. So the fact that the drivers or the staff was one of the reasons, but for it to be at the top on both of them, for both bus and ferry, that was impressive. As well as the second reason that people gave it, which is enjoyable. It's relaxing. It's enjoyable. Well, we don't get that on Samtrans. We don't get that on, some of the other studies that we do for other agencies, as much. It's not that it never comes up and, it's maybe on the Caltrain it comes up, but it was up there, so those are two that immediately come to mind. Yeah.
Next is Director Snyder.
I just had a question on your non-rider surveyors. How did you guys find the non-rider surveyors? I mean, the non-rider. What was the
So it was a hybrid study. It was done both by phone, sort of cell phone, as well as online. So we did it in both ways. We, the criteria for it was, living in specific counties, which I mentioned before, and they were also screened to ensure that they had made that trip, within the past month.
So you know that they're a commuter into the.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Massey.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably different numbers in different divisions on this, but how many surveys were taken?
That right here?
I looked and I didn't see it.
Yeah. So sample size on the bus study was 1,762. So a robust sample size for bus surveying. On ferry, it was 1,162. So there again, that's also a robust sample size for a study of this type. On the non-rider survey, the one among drivers, 877. That's a really big sample size for a study of this type. We've done others, and that's also a nice sample size. I think I mentioned the canal. That one was in the 220 range, 228 for that particular one. Okay. Qualitative was smaller. So with qualitative, we're trying to get a few folks to provide, real detailed information. And on that one, I want to say it was around 60 or so, 62. Yeah.
One other question, and probably not for you, but have we tried to figure out how many riders take SMART to San Rafael and get off and get on the bus to complete the trip into San Francisco?
Yeah.
I have a fair idea about the
Our planning staff provides that to me periodically. So we look at transfer data at the San Rafael Transit Center, and we look at transfer data at Larkspur. Those transfers are a relatively small percentage of our ridership. We did change our bus schedules in August based on a request from SMART that they thought might help that. And so it's probably premature to see how the bus side has changed. On the SMART side, my understanding is the Larkspur station is their second busiest station. That having been said, for our ferry ridership, it's minuscule. If we have 380 people on the Tuesday 8 a.m. ferry, we didn't have 100 people getting off the SMART train walking across the street. So most of our ferry riders don't come from SMART, but that's likely to grow over time.
But transferring to bus?
We have the numbers. It wasn't significant when we looked at it the last time, but I think we need to give it a few months after the August change to see if it's something that can continue to grow.
Okay.
Because depending on where you're going in San Francisco, if you're coming down on the train and you want to get to the Civic Center area, taking the ferry doesn't do you much good because then you're transferring to Muni and it takes a while. So, I think marketing that transfer in San Rafael is important because I think it will work well for, certain trips.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Thayer.
Thank you so much. So I have two questions. On the non-rider sample size, the 877 people, where did you find those people? Was that, I know you touched on this, but was it a license plate survey of people going over the bridge, or how did you determine, was it just random when you were doing other sampling?
Yeah, so it's a hybrid. So the portion of it that was phone, it's a random digit, but it also includes cell phones. And so it would be calling, and then you would screen out. So a number of people who we would reach didn't qualify because they didn't take that trip. And then in addition to that, there was an online component to it where they got the same survey and they were asked the same screening questions.
Okay, so this was all part of the same survey, and then you separated those folks out and asked them more questions as a non-rider.
As a non-rider, those were the screening questions, and then they continued on to that.
Okay,
right. Yeah.
I understand.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense, yes. And then on page 51, under barriers, I wanted to see the division between bus and ferry, and I wanted to know if it was very different in terms of why, in terms of the barriers to ridership, because I think that's really what we need to know in terms of increasing ridership. We need to know what are our barriers.
Yeah. So with this particular one, since we were asking questions about transit adoption, right? And we were asking what are the reasons why you don't use it. So we didn't ask these questions separately among, are these barriers to ferry, are these barriers to bus? It, really would have kind of expanded the survey to a length that might have been difficult. So instead we said, what are the barriers to you trying it? Now, we do have specific questions in that survey where there's some, touching of ferry and bus, but in the most part, it's bus or ferry. And so there's not really much of a split there for the non-rider piece.
That makes sense. It would be great to see the whole report.
Oh yeah, there's the reports provide the depth, and there's cross tabs which provide even more depth. For those who love data, there's lots of data to be had.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Director Parr.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. In this time period when we're getting so many calls and so many requests, how many calls do you actually make to get 800 responses?
Again, about half of it was calls, and you have to make quite a few. And so, you're really making, 10 to 15.
That's exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for like half of the people don't respond, or 25% of the people don't respond.
Yeah, I can go back and look at the dispositions of it, but it has mostly it's whether or not they're picking up or not, whether or not you're getting through or not. And so we do have a protocol where you do callbacks, you do it during different time periods. You leave a voice message to let them know what it is, because sometimes when they hear what it's about, then they're willing to pick up the next time. So I don't have that figure in front of me, but I can certainly get back to it.
It would just be interesting.
Sure.
Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I have a couple I'd like to ask. Excuse me. Half of my family lives in Marin, and half of my family lives in San Francisco. So we take the Larkspur Ferry. I've noticed in the last 6 months or so a lot of socializing going on that ferry. Sort of like what they said with the old days, that were play bridge and things like that. I'm not sure if you caught much of that, but there was the social factor. That the one that I know is.
What I would say, it did come up, because when we talked about, sort of reasons for using, or some of the key reasons for using it, or reasons for people being satisfied, I think that's something that, I don't know if it came up specifically as socializing, but enjoyable, or, the fact that those are some of the reasons why they do choose to ride the service.
The last thing I wanted to mention is San Francisco. We have changes that have occurred in the last 6 months to a year. Autonomous vehicles are one, and the second is insurance. I'd say personally, my insurance tripled, even though we had no collisions, no problems or anything else. It's outrageous. And as an early starter with Waymo, we are using Waymo almost more exclusively and considering getting rid of the car because of that difference. If that's so, then you have a big effect on mass. I mean, as mobility as a service. Are you seeing that anywhere in what you?
Well, I mean, we did this survey, about a year ago. I think you still have those factors, at play. I think where we saw, the savings of expense, particularly on the ferry side, what I would say when we got comments, it had more to do with kind of parking, or, what it would cost. Didn't see a whole lot on insurance. So my answer to that is I don't know that we saw a lot of that directly. What I will say, again, from having done a lot of transit surveys, and asked specifically about things like, how do you sort of compare costs? It's not something we specifically did on this study. Often that insurance piece, or those kind of that, wear and tear piece, is not something that factors in, or at least not at the level that is true, or that is accurate, right? Whereas people sort of think about those concrete things like it's $20 or $30 to park, So the answer is no, I didn't see too much of that. We didn't necessarily, hear that huge amount. But based on other surveys that we've done or work that we've done, sometimes it's sort of that hidden cost. The increases in insurance lately, though, have been substantial enough where maybe that's changing, right? It's not that it's going up 5%. Like you said, tripling is something you notice.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up. It's a very to a 2024 function. If it looks like it's going for much, it may not. If there are no more questions, then we'll move on. for item 5, which is a status update on the Marin and Sonoma coordinated transit service on the presentation slides. So we're on page 57. And I'll let you.
So I just wanted to say out loud that there was no public comment for item 4 before we move into item 5.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, thank you. And Director of Planning, Ron Dowling, is here to present the report. Ron, please give your report.
Thank you, Chair Hill, members of the committee, board members. Today, this is an information item on a study that's going on in Marin and Sonoma to look at the overall transit system. It's going to be making its way to other decision-making boards, so it will be going to TAM later this week as well. It will be going to Marin Transit and also through Sonoma County, so some of you may see it more than once. Today, I'm just giving an overview on what the intent of the study is, when we expect to see some recommendations, what the consultant is finding through the existing condition and analysis, expected deliverables from the process, and what next steps will be. So MassDOTS is the Marin and Sonoma Coordinated Transit Service Plan. It's intended to look at all of the transit operating in the Highway 101 corridor in Marin, in Sonoma, and between the counties down into San Francisco. It's kind of from the outside looking in, as if this was one service planned by one entity, how it would fit together, how the connections would be made. This is coming out of several years of more intense coordination among the transit operators in the Bay Area. We've been working together incredibly well in the past 4 years with multiple meetings each week. Dennis has a general managers meeting every Monday morning. There were various staff meetings on service planning, marketing, schedule coordination. So we've made great strides over the past 4 years. MTC is also involved in all of these processes, and MTC is one of the entities at the table in the MassDOT study. So the purpose is to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and awareness of transit in the Highway 101 corridor, not only to serve existing customers, but to develop attractive service for future transit customers. And again, how would it look like if it was operated as one system? So the timeline for the MassDOT study is during this summer. We had kind of a existing conditions assessment, understanding current conditions, and to from that analysis to find out what's going on in the corridor, what are the needs, and what might be the opportunities moving forward. Right now, we're in the phase where some existing solutions to address opportunities are being rolled out by the consultant. Right now, we are looking at what they've come up with, what they might be recommending, and what might be more refinements to the alternatives that are on the table. This will proceed in the next quarter into a document that elaborates on all of these issues, wraps it up in one package, and delves into the financial impacts of making changes within how transit service is delivered in the Highway 101 corridor between the 3 counties. So, no surprise, we've been talking about this in a number of venues. Travel patterns and the overall travel market in Marin and Sonoma has changed dramatically since the pandemic. SMART plays a much larger role than initially expected. The original EIR for SMART said that it would be really taking riders from a commute route that we used to operate between Marin and Sonoma that was Route 75. And that served employment destinations in Marin for residents of Sonoma County, including Fireman's Fund, the Marin County Civic Center, Bell Marin Keys, and so on. And things have changed. Some particular markets in this corridor have too much transit service. And so that's an important realization that we need to make the most effective use of our resources and just look at streamlining that. Another finding, no surprise to all of you, is the Golden Gate Ferry carries the largest share of trips between Marin and Sonoma. So that's a good thing. I'm sorry, between Marin and San Francisco. Thank you, Director.
We're going to Petaluma.
We don't have ferry service.
Short little trip.
In parallel with this, MTC has been looking at future planning scenarios going out to the year 2050. and in particular, looking at travel patterns all over the Bay region. There's a lot more cross-county travel going on right now. There's a lot more suburb travel going on. And again, as you heard from John Canterbury's analysis and what Dennis has offered you, there aren't as many people going into downtown San Francisco right now. Some of the findings from Plan Bay Area 2050 found that about 2/3 of the trips from Marin and Sonoma counties originate in San Rafael or Point South. So Southern Marin, Central Marin is really the heaviest number of trips generated for people going into San Francisco. More than 3/4 of the trips between Sonoma and Marin are within the area that SMART serves. So that's a very important development that did not exist before the SMART train began running. About 2/3 of the trips from both counties to San Francisco go to downtown San Francisco, Fisherman's Wharf, and Civic Center areas. Not a surprise, because those are the places where our transit service has traditionally served and continues to serve today. So as I noted, SMART has dramatically changed mobility between Marin and Sonoma counties. More people are using transit in the corridor since SMART came online. Right now, SMART is faster, more reliable, and more frequent than the parallel bus service during most hours of the day. As a result, they carry a larger share of those transit trips between the two counties. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, SMART carries about 2,400 passengers per day between Sonoma County and San Rafael, whereas Golden Gate Transit is currently carrying about 600. The consultant also did a deeper dive into Highway 101 between San Rafael and Marin City. There was a huge amount of transit service between those two endpoints, and 2 Golden Gate Transit routes and 2 Marin Transit routes provide a lot of service for 4 different routes. The schedules are, I wouldn't say not well coordinated, but somewhat coordinated. There's a high degree of Marin Transit service that enters and leaves the corridor. But the consultant has concluded that given the market for travel between San Rafael and Marin City, 6 buses per hour is too much. And so that's an opportunity to take a hard look at what the market will support in terms of spending our transit resources. Again, another point that you all will appreciate is that ferries carry the majority of the riders between Marin County and San Francisco. And those are the ridership numbers for our different ferry services. In total, about 3,700 weekday riders use the ferries to go from Marin to San Francisco on our different routes. And that is a far greater number than all of the bus routes that we have crossing the bridge going into San Francisco. Of course, there's significant differences in travel time and fares between the ferries and the buses. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison, but it's clear that people prefer the ferries to get to San Francisco. So right now we're at the point where there are some service recommendations coming forward that are intended to reduce some of the overlap and duplication in the whole corridor from Santa Rosa to San Francisco. And it really looks at concentrating service where there's ridership and ridership potential. Right now, these are only recommendations. We're just beginning to see some of them. We need to vet them internally within the organization to find out what makes sense within what our ridership base is and what the consultant is seeing from the outside looking in. The fiscal impacts of making any changes will also be available. And where we land on this will be brought back to the board, because undoubtedly it will be under the umbrella of a major service change. And as required by board policy, we have to have a public process, go out and talk to our customers, go out and talk to our community. And given that that takes a bit of time, I don't expect that anything will change before August of 2025 at the earliest. The region is looking at making major service changes in August and January of each year. So depending on how this rolls out, it could even be January of 2026. What we've tried to do in the region is make sure that these kind of changes among all of the transit operators happen at those 2 key dates so that transit passengers between agencies aren't left with waiting at a bus stop for a bus that left 10 minutes earlier. So that's kind of the overall look at the mascot study. As I said, there'll be more information coming forward. This is just a heads up for all of you because many of you will be seeing this in other venues. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron, for your presentation. Is there any further on this item from staff?
Sure, I'll jump in. Just a couple of things. First, history. SMART started service and they ended in San Rafael for the first couple of years. The extension to Larkspur was a huge change in how travel could occur in the North Bay. And that occurred, and then 2 months later, the pandemic hit. And so the world kind of stopped, and things people were thinking of doing never happened. So I want to acknowledge this effort and all the people working on this effort, because what we're doing is in the taxpayers' best interest. So all the agencies that are affected by this have gotten together to say, if it was all run by one company, would it look like it does today? If all the local buses, regional bus, ferry, and train were one company, what would it look like? And can we shift resources around to provide better service to the customer? And so that's the intent of all this, as Ron outlined in the early slides. So I would like to acknowledge the folks that are at the table, Ron and his team from our planning department, but also Marin Transit staff, Transportation Authority Marin staff, Sonoma County Transportation Authority staff, also Petaluma Transit, Santa Rosa City Bus, and Sonoma County Transit. Because we're all there, as well as MTC, who provided the lion's share of the money for the consultant. And this is really, I think, something that will be used by MTC as a role model for other portions of the region. You know, there's other areas of the region that are similar to us, and there's a lot of overlapping operators, and things have changed, and they really haven't been looked at in a long time. So it's exciting. What Ron presented is basically just background and context, but there are recommendations that in the next couple of months will be coming forward to you. And I want to give you a heads up that they will be provocative. But they're focused on efficiency. They're focused on a recognition that the world has changed and how can we better serve the customers. And they are focused on being neutral with respect to the amount of resources each agency spends on the service, but perhaps looking at changing how the service is put out there to align with other agencies, recognizing the new world order with SMART on the border going all the way to Larkspur. And so I'm just kind of giving you a heads up that you'll be seeing some stuff in the coming months that are very thoughtful, thought-provoking. They're still being worked out, but the work's proceeding very quickly. And I think it's something that all the agencies that are involved in this effort should be proud of, because it's focused on what's best for the customer and what's best for those that pay the bills. And so with that, staff's available for any questions you might have.
That's excellent. Are there any questions from directors? I'll do Holly first because she's further away.
Thank you. Do we know when this will be coming back to the board?
In a couple months. This is just kind of the background context to let you know what we're doing, but in a couple months we'll have stuff from the consultants and our staffs that are working through that, you know, we feel will be appropriate. After it comes to the various boards, then probably sometime next year there would be public outreach collectively by all the agencies, not independently, saying, look, we're looking at reimagining the corridor. Here's some ideas. What do you think? And then get public feedback before we then formulate final recommendations that would come to all the boards along with Title VI analysis before it's rolled out and actually implemented, whatever the changes might be.
Thank you. Director Thayer.
Yeah, just one more thing. I am a little concerned about the public outreach if you're looking at adopting something in August of 2025, because the way that I look at this is it is already almost November, then the holidays, so you lose a couple months. Then if it comes to the board in a couple months, there might only be a month or two for public outreach. And if it is truly provocative and you're intending to do many changes on the service that's being provided through Marin and Sonoma County, you know, I would like to see a very robust outreach to our residents so that they have a voice in any proposed changes.
Agreed. And I should maybe clarify, provocative is more for the agencies because we all have organizational egos. I think the customer will be viewed as something positive for the most part, or if it's not, we won't implement it. But I think the intent is to have changes. The customers will say, yeah, we like that. So I think it'll be, you know, organizational ego-wise, it'll be a little provocative. But I agree that we'll have to have a very robust, coordinated public outreach So the public kind of understands and weighs in and says, I like this or I don't like that. So all the boards can consider that in their ultimate decision making.
Director Grosswell.
On that 65, page 65, the one recommendation or comment conclusion was 6 buses per hour is too much service, and that was just limited between San Rafael and Marin City. Is that really the only specific change?
No. That was just one of the highlights, top level finding. There's other findings that look at everything else in the entire corridor, but that one stood out.
Some areas will recommend more service. Some areas will recommend less service when it ultimately comes forward to you to consider before we kick off public outreach.
Because as the earlier study, the prior speaker and his survey, of course, the biggest reason people aren't taking the bus is they want more frequent service. I know that's your biggest challenge is when do you start adding more bus lines, which you could do now without public hearings if you felt there was a ridership.
That's if we felt there's a ridership, right? So I think this is looking at it though more holistically, because some trips in the quarter may be best served by us, some may be best served by SMART, or some combination of SMART and us, or local operators. And so it's looking at all the service that's out there in Marin and Sonoma that connects between the two counties and to San Francisco, and to say, what could we do better? If we're, pretending we're one company, we set aside our own little organizational egos. If we're one company, what would it look like? And then to bring that back to the respective boards and then to share that with the public to say, is this better or worse for you, with the intent being that it would be better for most people with either more frequent service or faster service, or for some people maybe the trade-off is it's a little slower when you have a lot more frequency. And then we'll hear from the public what they think about all that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Moulton Peters.
Yeah.
Moulton Peters.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, Ron. I want to echo from the MTC perspective what our general manager said. We are an early adopter, sort of looking at the the coordination potential. But it's coming up a lot from our state legislature, who would like to see more coordinated service in the Bay Area, and really has an issue with 28 service providers in the Bay Area. So Marin and Sonoma work well together, and so we're early in to examine our own services and how we can be more efficient and more rider-focused. And I expect that this will be a model along with work that Solano County is doing in a similar respect. They have 5 transit providers, and they're looking to see what they can do to be more coordinated. Anyway, I'm glad that we're leading the way with this. I did want to request at some point a deeper dive perhaps into service to Marin City, the Canal, and maybe San Francisco. Marin City may have a lot of service, but it still takes people a long time to get where they're going. And that's not just ours to do, but it isn't just the amount of service. It's where it actually takes people. And Commissioner Rodoni probably has a similar situation with the canal, that people need to get different places, and the coordination improvements, I think, could help with that. But I'd like to hear more about it in the future.
The planning effort, when it comes back to you, we'll talk about the specific areas of concern, including both of those.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Sorry.
Just want to echo that and thank my colleague from MTC and the Bridge Board. Thank you, Dennis, for participating. We are ahead of the curve in terms of, I think, that coordination. So I appreciate the participation. I think it will, and your word of organizational egos with the never would we have invented the transit system that we have. It came about because the state of California has never really supported transit directly. Right. So then every individual area, whether it's a county or a city, would have to provide their own and usually go out after a tax measure or whatever, and SMART's that way. And certainly this district, many 100 years ago, started that way as well. It's interesting now that the state wants to come in and tell us then what to do and how to coordinate when all this history has taken place. And so as we all, show us the cash and we'll maybe come to fruition. I do think that the challenge going forward will be those, the old chicken and the egg, if it's just increasing frequencies. I mean, we see this in our own county. Gerard and I were on the losing end of a battle over some funds that come to this agency that my colleagues want to spread amongst the local bus service, but there's no real coordination about whether that, even if there's a need there, that's not being met. So I do think that we need to make sure that we stay above the fray. I think we've all learned through floods and fires that you can't let any disaster go by without taking advantage of it. Certainly the pandemic for public transit has been a disaster in many ways, and we need to make sure that we, coming out of it, really make the changes that are needed to make sure that we're financially sustainable going forward, but also building that ridership in whatever place the future holds for us. So I do appreciate that. There's lots of stuff happening, even from Monday's meeting that, as Dennis reminded me, I wasted 7 hours on my wife that I could never get back, for being in the, what do we call that thing? The transportation
Select committee.
Select committee for trying to figure out a measure. There's no consensus, not surprising. And so we'll still battling through that for the future, and how Golden Gate plays a role. We're kind of on the fringe, but we're not. And I look forward to the future discussions, because I think there's lots of stuff happening that we need to stay on top of.
Thank you, President Rabbit. Are there any further questions?
7 hours.
15-minute lunch break.
Yeah.
Did they give you lunch break? Yeah. Got to inhale it.
Is there anyone from the public who can speak on this?
That is.
We have no speakers for this item.
Okay, thank you. No action is required for item number 5. We will now move on to agenda item 6, which is the monthly report on bridge traffic, transit ridership trends into the Orlando already, and transit service performance. Dennis, go ahead with the report.
All is good. Bridge traffic was declining in July and August compared to the same months a year earlier. Fortunately, that trend stopped in September. Bridge traffic was up 2% compared to September of 2023. Ferry ridership was up 15% compared to the same month a year earlier, and bus ridership was up 2%. So we still see steady growth in the quarter, so that's all positive. That's it. Any questions I'm available to answer on?
Are there any questions? Seeing none. See. That concludes discussion at this time. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 6?
No speakers for item 6.
Okay. Thank you. No action is required. For the informational report, we will move on to item 7, monthly report on activities related to Marin Transit. Dennis, do you have anything to report related to this item?
All is good.
Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none. Well, you've been tired today. This concludes discussion on this item, and there is no action required for item 7. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 7 or address this committee under item 8, which is public comment?
We have no speakers for item 7 or public comment.
Thank you. We have reached the end of the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Yep.
I thought we should make our mascot Carl Falk.
Pardon me?
No, we adjourn.
Hearing no objections, this concludes the meeting of the Transportation Committee. Thank you, colleagues. The time is 10:19.